All right, your part 1500 purposes, policy, and mandate. 1501 purposes, policy, mandate, reduce paperwork, reduce delay of agency authority. 1501 purpose of the National Environmental Policy Act is our basically national character of the protection of the environment. The established policy with the goal of Section 101, receiving the site provides means in Section 102 carrying out the policy in Section 1022 may contain the acting force provides provision to make sure that the federal agency acts according to the letter and specifically in the spirit of the act. The regulation follow implementation impact 1022. The purpose of the tell federal agencies what they must do to comply with the procedure to achieve the goals of this act. The President and federal agency of the court share responsibility enforcing the acts to achieve the substantive requirements Section 101. The National Environmental Policy Act procedures must ensure the environmental information available to public officials and citizens before decision making or before actions are taken, and information must be highly quality, accurate, scientific analysis, expert agency comments, public scrutiny as essential for the implementation of the National Environmental Policy Act. The most important National Environmental Public Act documents must concentrate on the issues truly significant with the action question rather than amassing needless detail. Ultimately, of course, no better document may have the better decision than the National Environmental Policy Act. Purpose of the generated power work is not to generate paperwork, or even excellent paperwork, but must foster excellent with the action of the National Environmental Policy Act with the process for the intent to help public officials making the decisions based on understanding the environmental consequences of the take actions of the store, protect, restore, enhance environmental regulations, provide a direction to achieve the purpose. All right, 1502 policy. The federal agency shall to the fullest extent of the possible interpret the administrative policy regulations of the public law of the United States in accordance with the policy set forth in the act and these regulations. Interpret administrative the policy regulation public law of the United States in accordance with the policy set forth in the act and this regulation. Implementation proceed with the National Environmental Policy Act. The process must be more useful for the decision making of the public with the reduced paperwork, the accumulation of the extraneous background data to the emphasize of the real environmental issue. The alternatives environmental impact statement shall be concise, clear, and to the point shall be supported with the evidence by the agencies have the necessary with the environmental analysis. Integrated requirement of the National Environmental Policy Act with the other planning environmental review with the procedure review required law and agency practice for the produce the procedures run concurrently rather than consecutively. Encourage facilitate the public involvement in decision will affect the quality of the human environment. Use the National Environmental Policy Act with the process identify the accept the reasonable alternative of the proposed action, avoided, minimize adverse effects of the action, with the quality of the human effort, all practical means with consistent with the requirements of the act of essential consideration of national policy to restore and enhance the quality of the human environment, avoid with the minimize of any of the possible adverse effects of the actions and quality of the human environment. 1503 mandate. Parts 1500 through 1508 with the title provided with the regulation applicable to binding of all federal agencies, the implementation procedures of the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 as amended, and except where the compliance were inconsistent with the other statutory requirements of these regulations are issued by the National Environmental Policy Act, the Environmental Quality Improvement Act of 1970, and the Section 309 Clean Air Act as amended, Executive Order 1151-4, Protection and Enhancement, Environmental Quality. And these regulations or predecessor guidelines are not confined in Section 102.2c. Regulations apply with the whole Section 102.2. The provisions of the Act of the regulations must read together wholly in order to comply with the spirit and letter of the law of the Council intends for the judicial review of the accomplished agency compliant with the regulation not occurring before the agency has filed final environmental impact statement that has been final finding of the significant impact when such finding will result of the inaction affecting the equipment takes action will result in an irreparable injury. Furthermore, in the council intent with the trial violation, these regulations does not give rise to any independent cause of action. All right, 1504, reducing paperwork. Agency shall produce consecutive the paperwork, reducing length of the environmental impact statement by the means setting with appropriate gauge page limits, appearing analytical rather than encyclopedial environmental impact statement, discussing only brief issues rather than significant ones, writing environmental impact statement in plain language, following with a clear format environmental impact statement, the emphasizing portion of the environmental impact statement, the use of the decision maker of the public of the reducing emphasize of the background material. The scope of the process is not only identify the significant environmental issues deserving is shaped but also to emphasize insignificant issues narrowing the scope of the environmental impact statement process according to 15017, the summary of the environmental impact statement, the 15212 circulating summary instead of the entire environmental impact statement, the later usually intended in the 150219. Using program policy planning and environmental impact statement, the tier statement of the broad scope of the narrow scope, to eliminate repetitive discussion of the same issues, incorporating by the reference, integrating in the National Environmental Policy Act requirement, other environmental review, consolidation requirement requiring with the comments of the specific if possible, attaching circulation on all change with the drafting environmental impact statement rather than rewriting circulating entire of the statement of the statement with the minor, eliminating duplication statement, the local procedure to provide further joint preparation with the other federal procedure, the procedure providing that the agency may adopt environmental documents prepared by another agency, combining environmental documents with other documents and categorical exclusion, defining categories, activities, actions which do not identify individually cumulatively has significant effect on the human environment, which were therefore exempt from the requirements to provide environmental impact statement. 1508. 4. Finding of no significant impact with the action not otherwise excluded will not have a significant effect with the human environment is therefore exempt from the requirement to prepare environmental impact. 1508-13. Alright, 1505, reducing delay. Agency shall have the reduce the delay integrate with the National Environmental Policy Act, with the early planning, with the emphasizing with the interagency cooperating with the environmental impact statement of the prepare rather than submission adversary comments of the compliant document, ensure for the switch, the fair resolution of late agency dispute, use scope process for the early identification of the what and what are not really issues, and establishing appropriate time limit to the environmental impact statement, the process of the 15017 the B2 and 15018. Her preparing an environmental statement early in process 150225, integrate with the National Environmental Protection Agency requirements of environmental review with the consultation requirements and eliminating duplication of state and local procedure provided with the joint preparation 15062, with federal procedure that provided the agency may adopt the appropriate environmental document prepared for another document 15063. Combining environmental document with the other documents 15064 with the use of accelerated procedure for the proposal legislation 15068. The category exclusion defined with the categories action with not an individual cumulative with a significant effect with the human environment with the 15084 and which are therefore exempt from the requirements of the prepare of the environmental impact statement, the using finding no significant action not otherwise implemented, not otherwise excluded will not have a significant effect with the human environmental 15083 is there exempt from the requirements to prepare environmental impact statement. The 1506 is agency authority. Or each agency authority, each agency shall interpret the provision of the act and supplement the existing authority as mandated with a view of the traditional policy, mission in light of the act's national environmental objective. The agency shall review the policy procedure of the regulation accordingly to revive the necessary to influence, ensure full compliance with the purpose of the provision, act with the phrase to the fullest extent possible as Section 102, meaning that each of the agency federal government should comply with this section unless existing law applicable to the agency operation expressly prohibits makes the compliance impossible. Alright, Part 1501, National Environmental Policy and Agency Planning.